In this video, we're going to talk about how to learn the notes on the fretboard. And we're going to address the big myth that I think a lot of guitar players deal with that kind of hinders their progress in this area. We're going to start off with the simple stuff like what is a note, how many notes are there, and then we'll apply it all to guitar, and I'll show you a couple easy patterns that'll help you understand all the notes across the whole fretboard. The end goal being that you could just look at the fretboard and visually identify all the notes. Now before we get going, I want to be clear that there's no silver bullets. I can't make any promises that by the end of this video you're going to have all the notes figured out. It's not going to be like that. It'll take time, but if you apply the things that I'm teaching here, it should be easier. Let's start by addressing the big myth that I always see in this area of guitar learning. I think guitar players sometimes get really enamored with this idea that if you learn all the notes on the fretboard, you're going to be able to play music in the same way that if you know where all the letters on a keyboard are, you're going to be able to type. This analogy gets thrown around a lot, and I actually do think it's a little off. I get why it's appealing to a lot of people. It makes intuitive sense. It's one of those things that just kind of clicks in your head. But I think if you were actually to approach guitar learning this way, it'd be pretty inefficient. Let me explain what I mean. Guitar playing isn't really about memorizing the notes on the fretboard and then thinking in terms of note names in order to kind of create music that you want to create. Guitar playing has more to do with knowing where and when to apply shapes and patterns that you've studied. So to demonstrate it with a guitar, I would explain it like this. This is a G major chord. When I'm playing this chord, I'm thinking about this G major chord shape, right? What I'm not thinking about is the fact that a G major chord is made up of a G and a B and a D, and then hunting down where those are on the fretboard and applying my fingers in those places to make this chord. I'm just thinking about this chord shape, this pattern that I know, and applying it where it needs to be applied. Now I don't bring this up to just discourage you from learning the notes on the fretboard. I think there's plenty of great reasons to learn the notes on the fretboard, but I'm just saying that learning to type on guitar is not one of them. Learning the notes on the fretboard are really valuable to know where you should anchor those shapes and patterns. It's really important to developing a complete understanding of music theory. If you want to read music, it's really important for that. If you want to write your own music, it can be really important for that. So let's get into it. Let's first get a good understanding of notes in general, and then we'll apply that to the fretboard. Our first question is, what is a note? And that's an easy one to answer. It's just a single sound frequency. The second question is, how many notes are there? And this one is a little bit harder to answer. There's really two answers. The first answer is that there's a theoretically infinite number of notes, but the more practical answer is that there are 12 notes. Let me explain it like this. I mentioned before that a note is a single sound frequency, right? So if we take one frequency, for example, let's say 440 hertz, that's one single note. And in fact, that note is A. That's an A note. 440 hertz equals A. You might know that notes are named after letters, which leads us into this idea of the musical alphabet. The musical alphabet is just A through G, and then it repeats forever. So it'd be A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, on and on and on. This is where the first part of the question kind of comes in. There are infinite notes because the musical alphabet just repeats and repeats and repeats. But really, there are 12 notes, and this is a little more confusing because you might think, okay, well, there's A through G, but that's only 7 letters. How can there be 12 notes? So here we have the whole musical alphabet. This is all 12 notes. It's A through G, and we can see that. We can see that there's A and B and C and D and E and F and G, and these are called the natural notes. But there's these weird looking in-between notes that have the letter paired with an additional little symbol here. These are called sharps. In music, this symbol is pronounced sharp, and it means higher. For an example here, if we start on D and we go higher than D, we're at D sharp. You can see here we have A sharp, C sharp, D sharp, F sharp, and G sharp. In the musical alphabet, every note has a sharp except for B and E. B goes right to C and E goes right to F. Now, the flip side of sharps are flats, which are represented by this symbol that kind of looks like a lowercase b, and it's pronounced flat. Flat means lower, so in this case, where we went from D to D sharp, we went higher. We can also call this note E flat, because we're going from E and just going lower. And this works for all the sharps. Whereas we were at A and we went higher to get A sharp, we can start at B and just go lower and get B flat. Same deal with the rest of the sharps. We could call this C sharp, or we could call it D flat. This could be F sharp, or it could be G flat, and this could be G sharp, or remember, it repeats, so it could be A flat. So really, the musical alphabet makes more sense if you look at it like this. If you look at the fact that there are natural notes, which only have one name, and then the in-between notes, the sharps and the flats, are the same note, but these have two names. I just want to emphasize that there are only 12 notes, it's just that some of them go by two different names. There are really advanced music theory reasons why we make this distinction, but for now, just focus on the fact that these notes have two names, it's confusing, I'm sorry, don't blame me, blame the music gods, they made all this stuff up. But anyway, that's how there are 12 notes. We have the natural notes, of which there are only 7, and then we add sharps and flats, right? And then this just repeats over and over and over in both directions, and that's how there's a theoretically infinite number of notes. The reason I say theoretically is because obviously on any given instrument, we can only play however many notes are on that instrument. But now for the moment that everybody's been waiting for. Let's apply this to guitar. Okay, so when we're mapping notes on the fretboard, first thing we gotta do is know the names of the strings. You should already know that the names of the strings are E, A, D, G, B, E. The other thing you should understand is that at the 12th fret, which is usually indicated by a double dot, that the notes repeat. So if this open string is an E, at the 12th fret, it'll be an E as well. And if this first note is an F, for example, at the 13th fret, that'll be an F. This has to do with the idea that we talked about earlier, where the notes repeat. This is called an octave. So here's an E, and one octave up, there's this E. It's the same note, just in a different register. That's what octaves are. So to clarify what I said earlier, in one octave there are 12 notes. The first thing you should do to memorize the notes on the fretboard are just learn all the notes on the A string. Now again, to be clear, you only have to learn up until the 12th fret, because at the 12th fret they just repeat. You should start with the A string because the open string is an A, so it maps on to the musical alphabet that we just talked about really well. It starts with an A, it's in alphabetical order, it's nice and easy. Now another concept to understand is that across every string, the notes are still in the same order, they just have a different starting spot. A is really convenient because it starts with A, and A is the first letter of the alphabet, makes sense. But even with E, it's still going to be in alphabetical order, it'll just start with E. If you're on the B string, for example, it'll be alphabetical order, it'll just start with B. I'll go ahead and put all the notes of the A string on the screen now. Feel free to screenshot. Once you've learned all the notes on the A string, learn all the notes on the low E string. Now when I say learn the notes on the A string and the low E string, you pretty much just gotta struggle through this. Unfortunately, there's no silver bullet, no trick here. My preferred method of struggle is tears and suffering, but whatever works for you, just get these notes memorized. I'll put the notes on the screen, and feel free to screenshot, but I'll also include a link to a good note chart in the description. Once you know the notes on the A string and the low E string though, it starts to get a lot easier. First things first, the notes on the low E string are the same as the notes on the high E string. So if you know the notes on the A string and the low E string, you also know the notes on the high E string, and so you've got 3 out of the 6 strings already covered. When it comes to learning the notes on the D, G, and B strings, there is a technique that you can use to make it a little bit easier, and it has to do with octaves like we mentioned before. Let's start on the low E string. Let's say that you've memorized that on the 5th fret of the low E string, this is an A. If you go 2 strings over, so over the A string and then over the D string, and you go 2 frets up, so if you were on the 5th fret, you jump up to the 7th fret. If you play that note, 7th fret on the D string, it will be the same note, just 1 octave higher, as 5th fret on the E string. You can move this shape around to find all the notes on the D string. So if you know that the 1st fret on the low E string is an F, and you just use this shape, 2 strings over and 2 frets up, you'll know that the 3rd fret on the D string is also an F. So if you don't know what this note is, for example, you can just put your 3rd finger on it and go 2 frets back and then 2 strings over, and you'll realize that this is a C. The same thing works if you shift the whole thing over to the A string. You can find the notes on the G string. So if you're on the A string, let's again say that you're on the 5th fret. You know that note's a D. If you go 2 strings over, so as to be on the G string, and 2 frets up, so now you're on the 7th fret, that's also a D. So by knowing the notes on the E string and the A string, you can easily figure out the notes on the D string and the G string. So that leaves just the B string. This pattern is a little bit different. You have to start on the D string. So let's say you start here. We talked earlier about how this note is an A because you can put your finger here, go 2 frets back, 2 strings over, and find the lower octave on the low E string. So you know this note is an A. If you go 2 strings over, so as to be on the B string, instead of going up 2 frets, go up 3 frets this time. So now you'll be on the 10th fret of the B string. That will be the octave of the note that you're playing on the D string. The reason you have to go up 3 frets instead of just 2 is because the B string is tuned a little bit differently than the other strings on guitar. So this one will take a little longer. Let's say you don't know what this note is. You don't know what the 7th fret on the B string is. You put your 4th finger here, go back 3 frets and over 2 strings, and now you're on the D string. Put your 3rd finger on that note, go back 2 frets and over 2 strings, and you'll find that that's an F sharp. So here's the F sharp. You just have that memorized on the low E string. Here it is on the D string, you know, because of the octave shape. And you can find F sharp again on the B string because you know the octave shape between the D string and the B string. So there you go. That's how you figure out where all the notes are on the guitar. This will help you in the short run, okay? If you're trying to figure out notes and you know the notes on the A string and the low E string, you'll be able to find them. But in the long run, you do want to just memorize all the notes across every string. You can use any number of memorization techniques to help you with that. A popular one is picking a note, let's say, F, and finding all the Fs on the guitar. But either way, you want to be in a position before too long where you just have them all memorized by heart. So as a quick recap, we talked about the common mistake that I think people make when they're thinking about why to learn the notes on the fretboard. The typing analogy I don't think holds. We talked about what notes are and how many there are. We talked about the note names. We applied it to guitar, and then I showed you the octave trick for figuring out all the notes on the fretboard if you know the A and the low E string. And again, the ultimate version of this is just having them all memorized so you can recall them instantly. I hope this video has helped, and thank you for watching.